Welcome to our Ask the Experts about direct sowing and succession planting, our topic of the day. I'm Diane Blazek. I am the Executive Director for National Garden Bureau. You see on your panelist screen, we also have Gail Paps from our office who does all of our, let's just say she does everything behind the scenes. So if there's anything you appreciate that comes from National Garden Bureau, thank Gail. And with that, I am honored and pleased to introduce our panelists. I'll quickly name our panelists, then I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about themselves and their company. We have Kristen Noble from Harris Seeds. We have Heather Kibble from Cicada Seeds, and we have Jessica Cudnik from American Tacky. And let's go in order that I introduced you. Kristen, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your company?
Sure. Yep. Thank you, Diane, and thank you for having me as a panelist today. I'm excited to talk with everyone. My name is Kristen Noble. I am with Harris Seed Company. We're located out of Rochester, New York, and we've been a seed company for many, many years, going on 145 soon. So we've got a lot of history in the seed business, but we primarily focus right now on vegetable and flower seed, as well as growing supplies and some live products as well. I personally work on the vegetable product line, so that's kind of my passion and leaning. So you'll hear me talk more about vegetables today.
That's fantastic. And you wear a hat for All America Selections. What is that hat?
Indeed, I am an edibles judge for All America Selections. So I am one of the lucky people who get to see the submissions ahead of time and cast my vote on which ones should be winners.
And we truly appreciate that. Okay, let's see. Next, Heather, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Sure. I'm Heather Kibble, and I work for Cicada. I work in the vegetable division, but Cicada Vegetable Seeds, we're a breeder producer of vegetable and flower varieties. And I run a department that sells seed bulk to companies that repackage and sell to home gardeners or small farmers market growers or people that grow plants for home gardens.
For example, Kristen at Harris Seeds would be one of your customers.
Yeah. So we're kind of behind the scenes, but just know there's a lot of large breeder producer companies out there finding the best varieties for home gardeners and commercial growers.
Absolutely. And just to give Cicada a little plug, you guys are one of our trial sites, not you personally, Heather, but you have donated your time over the years, many years, to serve on the board of directors for both All America Selections and National Garden Bureau. So thank you.
I have, and I visit our AAS trial every year. It's in Salinas, California at our breeding station there. So it's always fun to go visit and see.
Yes.
We have some great judges that are there looking at things every day. So it's fantastic.
We love it and we appreciate them. Okay, Jessica from American Tacky with the big sunflower behind her head.
Yes, I actually am in the flower department, so that's interesting. So we've got both, veggie and flower experts on the panel today. And Heather mentioned Salinas, California. That's actually where American Tacky is located, but we are a 185-year-old breeding company. We do breed, vegetables and flowers. I'll be representing the flower side of things today. And I'm actually located in Georgia, so I'm on the East Coast. So a lot of my growing knowledge and timing does come from the Southeast.
And that's important to note, thank you, that we all are from different areas of the country. So there might be a little regional specifics when we do that. So that's great. And Jessica is currently serving on our board of directors. So we thank you for your time on doing that as well. One little housekeeping thing that I should have done in the beginning. We're very open to questions, and whatever's easier for you. If you want to put them in the chat, that's fine. If you want to put them in the Q&A, that's fine. FYI, when you put them in the Q&A, the panelists are the only ones that see them. When you put them in chat, everybody will see your questions. So just choose whichever one you want, whichever one is easier. And I thought we would start off with a few definitions because this webinar is about direct sowing and about succession planting. And so let's hear, we have 3 questions and I'm just going to let you guys decide which one you want to answer. Who wants to give the definition of direct sowing? I might have started off with the easiest question in the world, sorry, but who wants to define direct sowing?
So I will take that one. So direct sowing means that you are planting the seed directly out in the field, your garden, soil contact in the earth. And this is different than like sowing plug trays where you're putting them in soil in a plug tray or some type of container. So direct sowing right into the earth.
As opposed to planting it indoors and then transplanting it later, I guess is probably the best way to differentiate the two, correct?
That sounds right, yeah.
Okay, who wants to address this then? Succession planting, let's give the definition of that.
I can take that one. So succession planting is when you would have multiple sowings of the same product. So maybe you have the same crop, different varieties, but essentially you're doing multiple plantings so that you can have multiple harvests throughout one growing season. And you'll space those out according to, what the crop is that you'll be growing. You would have a specific timing or strategy behind those repeat sowings.
Great. And as soon as we start our presentation here to talk about some different varieties, I have asked each one of our panelists to talk about what might be the best succession planting timeframe for those specific ones. And then I guess my last question, and Heather, you can address this, is does direct sowing and succession planting only apply to vegetables? Does it apply to herbs? Does it apply to flowers, etc.?
Yeah, you could do that with any, you can succession plant any variety that you want to have an ongoing harvest. So I could see doing this with cut flowers, even flowers in the flower bed. You don't want them all, I mean, maybe you want them all blooming on the same day, but generally you want to spread that out. And then it certainly applies to vegetables. Things like lettuce come to mind because you don't want to harvest it all one day and that be it. You want to eat it throughout the summer. So that's where the succession planting comes in handy. But it can apply to a lot of crops, but especially the ones with shorter windows of harvest, I guess would be a good way of saying that, where everything's kind of going to be ready at the same time.
And herbs as well. So I do actually
yeah.
succession plant, herbs such as basil or cilantro, just because sometimes once those herbs flower culinary, I don't really have a need for them anymore. And so I want to keep them in the leaf stage. So I will, succession plant those.
Excellent. And we've got a couple of those coming up. So since you're on, Jessica, let's go ahead and go through some of your flower varieties that you've chosen for either direct sow and or succession planting. So I'll just let you go through. I think you've got 7 and then we'll go to another 7 and another 7. So
so I made these little note cards that actually will show the seed size of what's on the presentation. And the reason I did that is because we'll get to it later, but some of these larger seeds, those tend to be ideal direct sow. But even something like this brassica, it's a bit on the small side, but this is a cut flower brassica. We have the Crane series. And the reason we think that's an excellent direct sow option is because it's such a robust seed. You're talking about it's going to germinate in 3 to 4 days. So you're going to know if you were successful. And that way, if you weren't, you can quickly resow. Some of the pitfalls, which we might get into about, pros and cons of succession, direct sowing. Some of these like fast germination ones are ideal because you kind of need to know if it worked in the ground. So this is an easy crop because it's fast to germinate. And you will, it's a vigorous grower, great for cut flowers. It also works for succession planting because, I would say the spacing on this would be about 2 to 3 weeks in between your sowing. And that allows for the crop to color up at different times, making a long harvest period. So brassica, that's a good one.
excellent. Thank you. Whoops, got to get back over here. There we go. Next one.
Ooh, so dahlia. So this one's a little bit of a larger seed. It actually does look like zinnia, which I will show later. So this one's easy to handle. Also a great, germinator. Now this one is an exciting introduction that you should see in the next year or two, reaching your retail, outlets. But yeah, so this one is more on the warm side. So like brassicas, you want to do in cool, early spring, late fall. Dahlias will be a summer crop, so you want to put that out as soon as the soils warm up, so at no risk of frost. So you want to look at your frost dates to see when you would direct sow this dahlia from seed. Now this one is a continuous bloomer, so I would have to know, you'd have to know what you're using it for to know whether you would successively plant it. But for sure, direct sow. This one's easy to handle and a fast germinator too.
Thank you so much for those flashcards. That's a great idea. Okay.
Well, because sometimes the seeds are so much fun to play with, like nasturtium, tropiolum. This one's like a big, robust bowling ball seed. So this one's easy to handle. This one's another cool crop. So this one you want to put, early spring. And I'm not a lazy gardener, but I'm like an efficient gardener. So I just throw, a couple seeds in my combo pots, because they'll germinate and sprout, outside without having to make a transplant. So this one's great for direct sow because it's easy to handle and can take some of those early spring cooler temperatures. And I don't worry about it. I just throw them out and then wait for them to come up. And the baby series is great because it's an AAS winner, which is huge. We've got a lot of these in the presentation today. But the flowers sit atop the plant, which is different than some of your older time trailing tropiolums, nasturtiums. So this one's an exciting breeding development. Now salvia is kind of like brassica in the sense that it's a bit of a smaller seed, but all the colors here that you're seeing are AAS winners, so they will perform. And I said this one is great for direct sow because it's so vigorous. It's actually astounding how fast you can go from seed to flower for the summer series. And this one's like, it's durable. So I'm in the South, heat, humidity, continuous flowering. This one's just an easy one to sow. And again, this one has continuous flowering, so I don't necessarily think this one might work for succession, but definitely for direct, very easy to grow. Sunflowers. So it's kind of an obvious one, right? I mean, the seeds are easy to handle. You've got, pot type, dwarf type. You've also got cut flower type, like the Sunrich series, which comes in all sorts of colors. And this one is great for both direct sow, and you're probably going to want a successive sow as well. In the South here, we do about 2 to 3 weeks in between. And what that does for cut flower growers or home garden growers that do their own cut flowers, makes sure that you have cut sunflowers ready and available throughout the season to make bouquets with. So because cut sunflowers are 1 flower head per stalk, it means as soon as you cut it, the plant is done. So that's especially important with successive planting, so that you can keep having more sunflowers throughout the season. And again, this one's an easy to handle. This is a warm season crop, so you definitely want to wait till after your frost and freeze temperatures are over, and then you can get to it. So canna is another fun one, like nasturtium. It's got this little bowling ball. I mean, it's a big seed, so easy to handle. Another plant that loves tropical temperatures, heat, humidity, warmth, water. You can even do a semi, pond culture with cannas. So this one we featured the South Pacific Scarlet and Orange because they are AAS winners. So you've got these really vibrant colors on crisp green foliage, and it stays compact. So it's not those like huge landscape old types that get like 8 feet tall and out of control. These ones will work both in containers and in landscapes to keep things tidy. Now, we haven't really talked about seed technology and how to get seeds to germinate, because that's other talks, but it is important to know that companies are aware of how important it is to have easy germination. All the other seeds I showed you, you don't really need to do any tricks or tips. No scarification is the technical term, but canna has a very hard seed coat. And so we've done the work for you. We actually drill 2 laser holes. That's right, lasers. Drill 2 little holes into the seed coat for you, and that allows water to get in, making it easy to germinate, and then you have success in the garden. So this one's easy to handle as well.
I was hoping you would bring that up because I mean, the first time I grew cannas from seed, I was just blown away about how easy they were and how big the seeds were. It was like, well, that was just super fun. Great for kids gardening. You know, there's a lot of these things that would be good for kids gardening. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up and explaining.
Yeah, I love talking about lasers, so.
Yeah.
And of course, last but not least, zinnia is another easy one. Now on this seed card, you can see that I've got 2 yellow and 2 raw. So these yellow ones are actually coated. It makes it easier for growers to manually sow them. But you as a home gardener or a small market farmer could do raw or coated. Just depends on how you sow. The yellow is actually kind of nice even when you direct sow, which these are great for because of the size and the quick germination, because it kind of helps you keep track of your spacing when you direct sow in the rows, which I think is important. I'm actually a heavy seeder, so sometimes if I can't see it, I'm like putting super extra, and then I gotta like yank the little babies out because I gotta thin them so they grow healthy. But yeah, thinning is a very important part. But yeah, so this is zinnia seed, very easy to handle. Again, another quick grower so that you know that if it works. And depending on the type of zinnia that you're growing, some you probably want a successive sow so that you have fresh flowers and they don't succumb to some of the heat and end of season funk that can get zinnias. But others are quite well branching for like the landscapes. You may not need to do that. But I say for cut flowers, probably want to keep a fresh batch coming. And I would say, yeah, every 2 weeks is pretty good for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so we've got our flowers in, and now we are going to go to Heather to talk about her edibles. I think you've got an herb or 2 in here and then some vegetables. So take it away, Heather.
Sure. So this is arugula. Astro is the name of the variety, and this is perfect for direct seeding and for succession planting. It matures pretty quickly, so like with many of the flowers, you'd want to plant this about every 2 weeks. And remember just not to overdo it. It's tempting when you get out in the garden with a whole packet of seed, but if if you space it out and just do the number of plants you think you will consume in your household and stop, and then do that again in 2 weeks, the seed will go a long way, and then you'll have an extended harvest too. So this matures pretty quick, and there's no benefit really to leaving it in the ground. You want to just harvest and eat that when it's ready.
Okay, Heather, and you basically a good segue to one of our questions, and I'll let any of you answer this, and it might be different for flowers versus vegetables. When you succession plant, do you leave the plant that is done flowering, or do you remove it completely? And I think there might be, like Jessica said, with sunflowers, it's one and it's done. With other things, I think on the zinnia, like you said, if you leave it, it might start to get a little straggly. So it's kind of up to personal preference. Heather, you just said on the arugula, probably that one's done and then bring in the next one. Any other comments on that?
Yeah. For disease, if you're lessening disease pressure, it's best to take like a plant like arugula, harvest it, and then take it out like it's done. Put the roots in the compost. Don't leave it there. And that's my general advice for vegetables most of the time, is you want to take the plant once it's done out of the ground and put it in the compost.
So I do want to shout out to arugula, because I actually, I've already been sowing my arugula, and I, like I said, I'm guilty of heavy sowing, and it's just don't do it, but So, what Heather mentioned was disease pressure. So it is good to rotate, and so like something like zinnias or sunflowers that you do want a successive grow, even though you cut the sunflower and then you're done. if you're direct sowing, you really probably are starting another plot while that other one, you know, because even though the sunflowers are uniform, you'll still get a few days in between harvesting them. So you're probably starting to be efficient. Start another plot, finish that last plot, let it rest, clean it up, and then continue to rotate. And you eventually will get back to that original plot, but for disease pressure, rotate, and also for efficiency, you're probably starting another plot.
Perfect.
Yep. And especially depending on how short your season is. So if you have a short season and you're trying to fit a lot in to that season, then you don't want to wait till the first crop is completely mature and replant. You want to, you know, 2 weeks plant and then 2 weeks later start the next one, and that'll extend your harvest. This is collard top chop. So collard's good for direct seeding. You can let the plants get huge like this if that's your preference. These also make a nice baby leaf product, so you could plant it closer. I forgot to mention the arugula there was planted like a baby leaf size, but it can also be larger if that's your preference. So you just kind of play around with spacing. A full-size plant of collard will get about 18 to 24 inches, and this one is kind of compact as compared to some of the older heirloom varieties, so it doesn't completely take over, but it does get to be a good size, so you want to leave plenty of space for the plant. And then I don't know about succession planting. If I was planting this as a baby leaf, yes, for sure. And then maybe I would do 2 plantings in the fall, because this will hold well in the fall. But it's not one that I would try and grow all summer necessarily, unless you live somewhere where the weather is really even, like Salinas, California. For the rest of the country, I think this is a good fall crop, and maybe plant 2 crops in the fall so you can extend it as long as possible. This is lettuce taboo. I just love this color. Again, this is a baby leaf planting, so you're going to harvest this like right now, the size that is. And then this one, you don't necessarily want to tear the plant out. What I do is I plant it like this. I start harvesting here, and then I let it get a little bit bigger, maybe into a teen leaf size. And if you're harvesting the leaves from the outside, the interior of the plant will continue to grow. So you'll have leaves. You can extend that harvest with that individual plant, and then also be succession planting so that you have more coming. Spring and fall for lettuce for most people. This is pak choi, Asian Delight. It was an AAS winner, I think 5 years ago, maybe. I don't remember the year, but this is a really cute, bolt tolerant pak choi. They look, I should have sent the picture with the view from the top. They look like adorable little flowers from the top. Pak choi is one of my favorites. It's a quick maturing crop, and this is one where you do cut the whole plant normally. So I would harvest this whole little head, and then the succession planting should be further down the row or in another area of the garden. It also, though, can be harvested for baby leaf if that's your thing. Then I would plant it a little bit closer and be harvesting the leaves from the outside like you did with the lettuce.
I love all the versatility, and now that baby leaf is so popular too, there's a lot of options and quicker ROI, I guess you can call it.
Yeah, leafy greens are great, like, because you're not waiting 100 days, right? Which,
and I have a tip of the lettuce. I find that so with like the romaine, baby leaf, and then if you harvest every other, then you've allowed a bit of space between the plants that you're going to harvest a little later to really maximize growth and extension.
Yep, perfect. I should have said that. Thank you.
Great tip.
Yeah. This is pea, little snap pea petite. This matures in just 65 days, so it's quick. The plants are not super huge, so they don't take up a ton of space, and the pods are a nice size. This can, again, when we talk about versatility, not everybody knows you can eat pea plants, the shoots. So you could plant this for shoots, you could thin it and leave some to get bigger and have these little pea pods. And then pumpkins. So the larger pumpkin here is hijinks. It's an AAS winner from about 15 years ago. And then the little guy there is Candy Corn Plus, the little orange guy in the front. And that should be spelled with a K, Candy Corn, both candy and corn. But we at Cicada like to name things weirdly so that you can't spell them. The hijinks is well adapted, grows just about anywhere. It's a full-size plant. The pumpkins are a good size for kids. They're easy to handle. I think it's about 8 pounds, but good full-size vines. And then if you have a little bit of less space, I really like Candy Corn Plus because it's a bush habit plant. So it's about 4 feet and you can plant those pretty closely in a smaller garden. And you can see those are super cute for kids. They're just tiny little things, but they're carvable. They're not the hard shell type. So you can carve and make little tiny jack-o'-lanterns with those. And they're very, very productive. So you don't need a whole lot of plants. Pumpkins, generally, people don't succession plant. If you were going to eat them, you might consider it, or if you want to extend your decorating. But for the most part, I think those could probably just plant once and have them for Halloween. This is an old favorite, French breakfast radish. Perfect candidate for succession planting. They mature super quickly. And this is another one where you want to watch the spacing a little bit. If you get overzealous, they can get funny. You get funny shaped radishes. So try and give them each like an inch. And because they're so quick, these I would probably plant once a week if you want to have a continual harvest.
That's great to know. And then one of the tips on radishes, you were saying, give them space. And this one looks like a more elongated radish. We have an AAS winter one that gets really round. And then I guess if you're thinking of beets also, just make sure you give them enough room because otherwise they won't get to their full size.
Yeah. If you're growing a watermelon radish or a beet, you want like 2 or 3 inches. And you're probably still going to have to do a little bit of thinning there. Yeah, which we'll probably get to talking about later, but
exactly.
For standard radishes, the little red rounds in this type, an inch usually is good.
And somebody has a question on these radishes, French breakfast radishes. Are they on the spicier side or milder side?
I find the milder. That can vary depending on where you are and how you've planted them and how stressed the plant has been. But in general, this variety is milder.
Great, thank you. Okay, and now we are going to go to Kristen, and we are going to start with an allium that I found was a new addition. I think, Kristen, pretty much all the ones from you guys, well, I think it varies. Some of them are new varieties, some of them aren't, but I think a good portion of everything in this presentation are on the newer side, newer introductions. But Kristen, I'll let you take it over from here.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll be happy to call out the ones that are newer ads for us. They may be things that you haven't seen before. So hopefully it'll spark some interest for trying out some of the new varieties that we've been fond of over the last couple of years. These first few slides that we'll go through are some of the herbs. And so we'll speak to kind of succession planting and direct seeding for herbs. Like Jessica mentioned before, sometimes it's a good approach with herbs to do a succession planting so that you don't have to try to keep those plants going when they are starting to kind of fade. The more that you've cut up at a basil or at a cilantro, it's going to be more apt to want to bolt, and you want to make sure you're keeping that foliage going. So that's when succession planting comes in handy. In some areas of the country, you might have really great success with doing strictly direct sowing for your herbs. I know here in New York, there's certain varieties that we struggle a little bit with, or that we can get the best optimal growth for the season if we do start transplants. So I know myself, one way that I like to do my herbs is that I will start a transplant for most of them in the spring, and then I'll direct sow another one later into the summer. So kind of a little bit of both helps get a little bit of a kickstart on the season, especially in the north when it's a bit too cool in the early spring to be seeding some of these. But we certainly, this allium is one that we really like because it can be cut from pretty regularly without too much impact. And it is a first-year flowering allium, so you'll get those really beautiful flowers in your first season. They'll flower in the spring and the fall. And they're really nice. It's a nice edible with kind of a garlicky chive flavor, and it's also a great pollinator attractor and a cut flower option. So the stems hold up really well. They have good vase life. And so it's really a nice versatile herb that you can use kind of in any way in your home garden. And when it comes to seeding something like an allium, you'll see that the seeds are really small. And so a good rule of thumb is that the smaller the seed, the shallower you should plant. So you'll see a lot of herbs will have pretty small seeds, and so you should plant them a little bit more shallowly. We'd say probably about 1/4 inch is a good approximate amount. Just make sure they're covered lightly, and then that will help give them a better chance of coming up out of the ground. We'll jump ahead. Thank you, Diane. So again, with basil, in New York, often we're starting basil from transplant. That's not necessary to do, but it gives you kind of a kickstart on the season. And if you wanted to direct sow again, to kind of have that rule of thumb of, a smaller seed likes a shallower planting. And often crops like basil will like warmer temperatures. So just being mindful about what your soil temperatures are as well will give you better opportunity for success when you're seeding some things like herbs. We really are excited about these new basil varieties. So the ones that we have pictured here are in order Everleaf Lemon, Everleaf Thai Towers, and Prospera Red. The 2 Everleaf varieties are really exciting because they have a really nice upright habit, and the Everleaf name means that they're slower to bolt than a lot of other varieties. And we've been really struck by that in the trials. It's very remarkable how long they go into the season without flowering, and you really can keep cutting from them. So to that same end, you could succession plant a basil and have multiple opportunities for harvesting from different plants, or in some cases, these varieties hold out a lot longer in the season before they start to flower. Not as nice if you want to use them dual purpose for a cut flower necessarily, but still the foliage is a really great filler if you wanted to do that as well. The Prospera Red is the first downy mildew resistant red basil on the market, so that's pretty exciting as well. And the red color holds through really nicely on both sides of the leaf. So really beautiful for, edibles, for a garnish, and also for cuts for that. And then continuing kind of with the herb theme, cilantro, we've got a couple of varieties that Harris Seeds carries, Leisure and Santo. These aren't newer varieties to the market, but they're pretty commonly known. And I found, myself that cilantro, especially once we get into the northern summers, when we go from, cooler spring into pretty warm summer pretty quickly, we can see that lean towards bolting a little bit faster than you might like. So cilantro is one that I find is beneficial to do a succession sowing. It doesn't always tolerate a lot of hard cuts either. The regrowth can be a little bit variable depending on what your season is like. So if you use a lot of cilantro in your household, it's nice to have some fresh greens to work with that succession planting as well. The next crop that we will focus on are carrots. The 2 varieties here are Intrepid and Sirocco. These are newer for Harris this year. So we're excited to have a couple new varieties to offer of the Nance types with that nice straight shape and kind of the blunt tip. We have a lot of customers who are maybe reluctant to grow carrots in their home garden because they can be a little bit testy. But again, some tips to keep in mind with carrots are that they do have a pretty small seed. And so again, shallow is good. And they can handle some cooler temperatures. So they do work well for kind of your border season plantings like spring and fall. Some folks in certain areas have success with overwintering carrots in cold frames and things like that. So it can be really flexible once you kind of get the hang of it in your garden. When it comes to direct sowing carrots, they are a very long germinator. They can take up to 3, sometimes 4 weeks. So just be patient and they will eventually come up. And Like Jessica said, it's not as nice as some other crops when you know right away if you were successful. You find yourself waiting a while to know if your carrots have germinated. And so that's another instance where it doesn't hurt to do another sowing because it is a case where you're harvesting the whole plant. You won't get any, additional harvest from that. So carrots are a nice one to have several succession plantings a couple weeks apart so you can continue to harvest. And then it gives you that buffer as well. If maybe they didn't germinate as well as you hoped, you have another planting that's coming up. To kind of echo off of some comments made before as well, carrot seed can be purchased as a pelleted seed, which is sometimes a really valuable addition if it's easier for you to hold a little bit larger seed. The pellet is a lighter color usually as well. It'll be typically a white kind of clay pellet that you can see a little bit easier to help you singulate a little bit better. Carrot seeds are very small and they can stick together when you're direct seeding. So sometimes the pellet makes it easier for planting and separating your seeds in the row. And one thing to just be careful about with pelleted seed is that it does need really even moisture for that pellet to dissolve away from the seed and allow the seed to breathe and germinate. So it can be really successful if you're able to keep that moisture very even for your carrots to germinate. And hopefully then you'll have a good even stand from that.
Okay, since this is a question specific to carrots, how long do
Sure.
carrot seeds last? I have pelleted seeds from 3 years ago that I forgot. Is it worth trying to plant them?
Well, from my standpoint, it's always worth trying. So I would still try even if they maybe didn't come up, but to have a backup plan could be a good idea. Carrot seeds would typically last that long if you had stored them in a cooler, dry place. To put a pellet on a seed can shorten the lifespan of that seed because you're basically enclosing it in that coating. And so the air exchange for that seed, which is a living thing, is reduced by that coating. So that's something to be mindful of, that pelleted seed doesn't always hold as long. I would say 3 years is kind of on the cusp for what we would expect from a carrot. You could probably have some good success if you stored the seed well. I personally would give it a try and just have a backup plan if they didn't come up. Or maybe try, your first sowing with those ones and have another sowing ready because they do take so long to germinate.
Great tips. Thank you.
Yeah. Cucumbers, people are pretty familiar with in their garden, I think, but the ones we've got featured here are a few new ones to Harris this season. Provision is a new pickling cucumber that's offered organically. So if you like to choose organic seed in your garden, that's a new option for pickles. Snack is the middle image there. It's a really nice, small, snacking cucumber with really great yields. That picture, it's trellised, so you can see the full set, but that's not necessary. They do quite well on the ground as well. And then the photo on the right is Tyria, and that's a European long type, and those typically do perform a little bit better when you trellis them. It gives you that nice, long, straight shape. When it comes to sowing cucumbers, again, I like to think about the seed size and how deeply you should plant. So I consider cucumber to be kind of a medium seed, so you can plant that at more of a medium depth. Kind of like a 1/2 inch is a safe depth for cucumbers. And consistent watering is really important because as your seeds get a little bit larger, they're taking in more water, and you want to make sure that they have that readily available to them. Not that they're sitting in like the sogginess, but that they have enough water that they don't have to pause their growth while they wait for the water to return. So that's something to keep in mind. Often with larger seeds for vegetables, you'll have seeds that are offered with various treatments. And that's certainly personal preference. Like I mentioned, the provision is available organically. If you like to grow that way, you have options. I know at Harris, we offer organic, we offer untreated seed as well as treated seed. And sometimes the treated seed will help If you find that you're having trouble with, seeds rotting after you've planted them, sometimes that's just fungus that you find naturally in the soil. And so that seed treatment can help keep that seed protected and safe while it germinates and comes up. So if that's something that you find you're having challenges with, we often see it more with larger seed that you'll have, fungus or insect pests that want to eat that seed because there's more, food there for them. If that's a challenge that you face, you can certainly reach out to the seed company that you like to work with, and they can help kind of recommend what solution might be for you. Another thing to keep in mind with things like cucumbers, when they do emerge out of the soil, you may also have things like cucumber beetles that come in right away and will eat the small seedling really quickly. So you can certainly use something like a row cover, remade fabric to cover those seedlings while they come up until they get big enough that they can hold their own against the pests in your garden. But those are, some tips and tricks, things that come up often with cucumbers. Because you can pick from your cucumbers throughout a lot of the season, you don't always need to succession plant them. But you certainly could if you have, if you see that you have a lot of disease that comes into your plantings as you get into the season, it might be helpful to have another one a bit of a distance away that you can start to pick from, and then remove the one that has the powdery mildew or downy or whatever it might be. So just keeping a close watch on what challenges you're facing in the garden and acting accordingly, I guess. Sweet corn is next, and this is another one that's a larger seed, so you can plant it a little bit deeper. And we say about 1 inch is a good depth for sweet corn. It typically likes warmer soils, so I would just be mindful about what your soil temperatures are, and remember that the air temperature is not necessarily the same as the soil temperature. So even though it feels pretty warm, it may not be warm enough for that seed in the soil. You can certainly use a soil thermometer and check if you're interested, or just be mindful about that before you plant. Sweet corn is one, again, that you're harvesting just one time typically from the plant. Sometimes you might get a second year if you're lucky, but usually you plan on just once. So succession sowing is really great if you do have a big enough garden and you want to plant more sweet corn, then you can put in a few more sowings. Typically about 2 weeks apart is a nice timing for that, so that you can continue to have sweet corn throughout the season. One thing that's really important to remember with sweet corn is that it's wind pollinated. And so the best way to have a good, successful planting with a lot of nice harvestable ears is to plant enough of it. So you'll want to plant it in a block, kind of like a square rather than one long row. If you have it planted in a block, then you'll get a lot of good wind movement to move that pollen around. And every kernel is formed from one pollination event. So that's part of why it's important to have a lot of air movement and pollen, so that you get a good full ear rather than one that's kind of splotchy with kernels kind of all over the place. So I like to suggest about 50 plants or more to have a good block to get enough pollen movement. You might have success with fewer plants, but just something to keep in mind if you'd like to have, really nice, beautiful ears like the ones that are shown here. The varieties pictured, American Dream is a nice one for home garden. It's a little bit smaller ear, but really awesome flavor, and that is an AAS winner. And then the others featured here are 2 newer ones for Harris this year. Playa and Stamina MXR are later season corn, so they'll be maturing around 80 days. So again, depending on what your region is, how much time you have in your growing season, you can use that to decide which varieties are best for you. You might have a shorter season and need a faster growing variety. Okay, and then watermelons, I'll echo some of the comments that Heather made about pumpkins. So you'll have big vines with your watermelons, and so depending on how much garden space you have, you may or may not choose to succession plant them. But you certainly could if you had enough time in your growing season as well. So I know here in New York, we don't have as much time in our growing season as locations in the South do. And sometimes watermelons can take, 80 days. And so you don't have as much wiggle room to do multiple sowings. You could space them out a little bit to get some more picks, but just something again to be mindful about how much growing time you have in your season and how much space you have in your garden as well. We see these have, a longer maturity than your cucumbers or your summer squash, which is a little bit easier to do multiple plantings of. But these will take a little more time to grow watermelons. One point to make about watermelons, you'll obviously know you have seedless or seeded watermelons. Seeded watermelons or diploid watermelons are typically easier to direct sow. They have a bit more of a rugged seed and they handle the outdoor conditions a little bit better. When you have your triploid or your seedless watermelons, those can be a little bit pickier. They really do like very consistent environment and really high temperatures. Usually around 80 to 85 degrees are ideal for germinating watermelon seeds, for seedless watermelons like the ones pictured. So often, especially in the north, we will start our watermelons as transplants if we're talking about triploids, just to make sure we can give them that extra TLC. But there's no reason you can't direct sow, especially when you've got locations with warmer soil or with, a diploid variety that's a little bit tougher seed. But it's just some things to consider as well. And the varieties that we've got featured on this slide are Cracker Jack, which is a new organic watermelon. So that's one that we're excited to have in the offering. And then Eleanor is a new variety that's got really great flavor and a really, really beautiful internal color like you see there, small pips. So very nice eating quality on those. So if you do have a big enough garden and you're feeling confident in growing some watermelons, we'd love to have you try these ones.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I'm turning off our slide presentation because I think we've finished that, but now we've got a lot of questions. In some ways, you guys were already answering some of the questions, but I think one of them, and it's going to depend, of course, on the crop, is when exactly should I direct sow? And I think there's probably some generic. If it's a warm season crop, wait until after the first frost. What about things like collard, broccoli? How early? I mean, I'm in Chicago and I don't think I should be planting broccoli in February, but how early can you direct sow things like broccoli and collards?
I can take that one. Not now, if it's so the ground needs to not be frozen when you're planting. So I would look at, well, first of all, look at the back of your seed packet. People in our industry spend an awful lot of time giving you very, very detailed instructions there by variety, by class, and sometimes if you're buying from a regional company, by region. So check out the back of your packet. If you're like me and kind of in a weird area, sometimes you have to do a little extra research. I'm in Southern California, so our timing's a little bit different on things. But in general, you want the soil to have warmed up enough that you're not going to have a freeze while the plant's trying to get started. So that's in the spring. And then for those crops that you grow in the fall, same thing. You want it to be cooled off, but not frozen while the plant's trying to germinate and grow. You'll see on the back of your packet, there are a lot of crops that can take vegetable crops that can take a light frost when they're mature plants. And for some crops, like I think it's Brussels sprouts and carrots, they are sweeter if that happens. So sometimes that's a plus, but you have to time that carefully so that the little baby plant is not freezing out in the garden when it's just getting started. So it's got to be kind of a mature plant before that frost hits. Hopefully that helps. And then warm season stuff, yes, wait until spring.
After the first frost. So yeah.
Well, after the last frost, if we're talking spring.
Sorry.
Yeah.
After that
and before the first frost in the fall.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so we answered those. you guys were really good about talking about the depth, and I think we've kind of covered that. But there was a question about, is there a difference between the direct sow depth, the if you're planting direct sow outside versus indoors, is there a difference in the depth, or is that depth across the board no matter how you're planting them?
I guess my feeling on that is it's across the board. It's not going to vary too much whether you're, indoors or outdoors. I think just being mindful as well that, indoors you're probably being quite attentive to your plants and making sure that they're not drying down too much or that they, have a good level of moisture. And outdoors you don't have as much control over that. So just making sure that, you don't plant something too shallowly or too deeply outside. Whereas it's going to dry down too much or too little.
Excellent, thank you. What, in your views, what are the pros and cons of direct sowing?
So as I mentioned before, I'm a heavy direct sower. And so for someone like me, I do better with transplants because it helps me control the seed. So I'm not putting like 20 seeds in a tiny little area. If I make a transplant, I'm putting, 2 to 3. And the other thing too is, especially in the South, when we get drought conditions, if I direct sow, I do have to, keep moisture out in the garden over usually a larger area versus like transplants. I can just water that tray. However, a lot of us don't have indoor setups. And so, there's pros and cons to each of them, and you'll have to weigh them for your needs. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons that I do make transplants because I also cannot wait because I get so excited. So we're 8 weeks out in Georgia from our last frost date. And so that is actually the perfect time for me to start transplants, some of the longer crops like echinacea and digitalis. But certainly there's no reason for me in the summertime to be making a transplant of like a squash or a cucumber. I can just stick that right in the soil and it'll germ and be easy. So.
Any other tips from you, Heather or Kristen, on that?
Sure, there are a few plants that don't love to be transplanted. So peas, somebody mentioned peas in the chat. They would be one that don't always respond well to changing their environment. So some will be stronger and healthier if you just wait and direct seed them. Yeah, so that's the only thing I would add, I think.
Yeah, usually they say anything with a taproot. So Asclepias for like butterfly weed or carrots or any of the root vegetables tend to be more happy if they're direct sowed.
What about using fertilizer for direct sow? When you're planting your seeds, at which stage should you fertilize? And then for succession planting, will subsequent plants need more or less fertilizer than the first ones?
So I want to plug for Extension. I used to work for the University of Georgia Extension, and they're such a great resource. Before you even think about planting, you should already have your soil test done because you won't even know what fertilizers or amendments you would need until you get a soil test. So that's, tip number 1, and then I'll pass it off.
Tip number 2, they don't necessarily need fertilizer on the day they were planted. After you've worked compost into your soil or whatever you're going to do to loosen it, you can get those plants started, and then I start fertilizing as the plants are growing. And again, it depends on the crop, but it is nice to have a good loamy, I think is the word, kind of lightweight, well-worked soil when you're direct seeding, especially the smaller things, because if the soil gets too clay or clumpy, those little tiny guys can get lost and end up being too deep in the soil. So instead of spending too much time worrying about fertilizer, I would make sure that your texture is good for seeding, and then let the plants get a little bit established before you start fertilizing.
So
Agreed. And sorry, Diane. I was just going to echo off of Heather's comment about having really loose soil, especially with smaller seed. They need to have good soil contact so that those little roots that they'll develop have something to grab onto. And if your soil is too large and clumpy, it won't have anything to really get a hold of. And it doesn't really need a whole lot of a boost until it starts, really trying to push out those true leaves and get more established roots growing, like Heather mentioned. So usually after they've developed those true leaves, you can start to pay more attention to fertilizer.
And somebody had just asked about bone meal. Bone meal afterwards, deep into the planting hole, question mark. You guys have any experience or advice on bone meal?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's different types of fertilizers. There's one that take a while to sort of become active, and there's granular, there's liquid, and your granular and your kind of like, so your granular, that would be a slow release, or your amendments like bone meal that take time to break down. Those do work better or incorporated before you start planting so they can start to work. And then they're available when the plant does have the roots that reach them. Whereas later, as the plant is growing, liquid fertilizer tends to work better because the plant's already growing. You don't really want to disturb the soil by digging in, granular or slow release or other amendments like bone meal. So when you incorporate, does matter for the type of fertilizer or amendment.
I remembered something I wanted to say too, in addition to that, is when we're talking about succession planting, I think all of us meant don't plant in the exact same spot. Like, we want to be clear. You do a short section of row of lettuce or whatever it is, and then 2 weeks later, you're in a different section. So because you would be depleting, I think somebody asked in the chat about depleting the soil. And yes, if you were trying to plant the same thing over and over and over again in the same spot, that wouldn't be great. So when you're putting in your next crop, put it somewhere else. Do as much rotation as your space allows, I think is probably good for your soil.
Good advice all the way around when you're gardening.
So I think that, Heather, there is some, I think, a little expansion on that. Because when we talk about 2 to 3 weeks after you first sow, I don't know that we have a 2-week crop that we've ever mentioned. So your crop is already going to take longer than when you want to successively sow. So for example, let's just say 60 days on this sunflower. So I'm going to direct sow, and then I already know I want another crop 2 weeks later. So I literally can't if I've got 60 days that I need to get this first crop to flower. And so that's where a little planning and a little bit of organization. So if I've got 10 feet, I'm only going to do, say, 3 feet, and then I'll do another 3 feet, and then another 3 feet with a little bit of wiggle room for, spacing error. And so that's how we would do the successive planting every 2 to 3 weeks for something like that we've mentioned.
One of the things that it wasn't necessarily a question, but something to bring up, when do you not want to succession plant? And let's say that you're wanting to can paste tomatoes. You want to make tomato sauce or something. Well, number one, you want to get the right kind of tomato that matures all at the same time. And you don't really want to do a succession planting there unless you do have long enough season and unless you want several crops where you can succession plant. But be thinking of how you're going to use them. Lettuces is a perfect example. Well, I want a salad every day, so I'm going to succession plant. But if it's something that you're thinking, I'm going to do it all at once and do all my canning all at once, when I lived down on the farm, it was the sweet corn. We wanted all the sweet corn to come at the same time because we gathered all the neighbors and cut it up and put it in the freezer, wanted it all done at one time. So that's just another thing to think of, is exactly which crop you're planting and how you want to use it. And with that, oh my goodness, our hour is done. We could probably go another hour. Any summarizing thoughts from the three of you before we close things up?
I just always encourage people to experiment, get outside, get your hands dirty, and just start doing it, because that's the only way to get it done. Start playing around with the seeds and the crops that will bring you joy in your garden. Agreed.
Yeah, don't be afraid to fail. Like, there's not a whole lot at risk. You paid what, $3 for a packet of seed, right? So get out there and give it a try. And if it doesn't work, you could try something else next time. And if when it does work, you feel like you've won a marathon or something. It's very exciting. So it's totally worth any risk.
Agreed. And there's a lot of resources available as well. I mean, through NGB, through your source for seed or supplies. So if you do find that you're not sure where to start, or you have questions about something once you get it going, don't hesitate to reach out, because there's, people like us who are really truly available to help answer your questions.
You are
I love it. We love it when somebody wants us to talk about vegetables or flowers. A lot of the time they're telling us to stop. So we're very excited when people want to hear about it.
What a perfect segue into me having to tell you we have to stop.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, it was wonderful information. I love it. I want to go plant more seeds always. This is really good information, very inspirational. You guys are the experts. And to reiterate what Jessica said, not only are the retailers excellent sources, but your local extension office, make sure you contact them. They know what's happening in your local climate, your local area. And with that, Kristen, Heather, and Jessica, thank you very, very much. And thank you everybody who was able to attend live. We will be sending out a recording. So in case you missed something, then you will be able to watch it in our recording. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.